Assalamu alaikum. In this lecture, we will talk about conditionals type 3. Previously, we had discussed type 1 and type 2. We saw that type 1 had used present tense in if clause and will in main clause. Then we discussed type 2, which was talking about hypothetical situations or imaginary situations, and it used past for if clause and would for the main clause. Now we would discuss conditionals type 3. Let's see what's the difference between type 1, type 2 and type 3. Can you guess from the idea? We have already talked about type 1 and type 2. If you have a fair idea already what could be type 3, you can write it in the comments. If not, let's continue. Or let's learn the structure if you already have some idea. Okay, so let's see the introduction and some examples. How was your camping holiday? Mike? Well, it would have been all right if it hadn't rained all the time. Harriet? If we had gone 2 weeks earlier, we'd have had better weather. So now we see that we're talking about certain situation which is not possible at all because something already happened in another way, and now we are talking or expecting it to have happened in another way. So now it is impossible to happen that in real context. So type 3 conditionals talks about certain situations. If it hadn't rained and we had gone 2 weeks earlier are imaginary situations in the past. Now, in type 2, we were talking about imaginary hypothetical situations, but they were likely to happen if they happened. Okay, so for example, she was saying, if I ate cake, I'll get fat. I would get fat. Now, we are talking about type 3 conditionals in which we would see we are talking about imaginary situations in the past because the past time has already passed. So now if you're talking about camping holiday, the time has already passed and now we're trying to imagine the past to have been different. Okay, I hope it is making some sense. So now we're imagining certain situations in the past. It did rain. Okay, so the rain already happened. It did. Now they didn't go to work weeks earlier. Now she is saying कि अगर हम 2 हफ्ते पहले गए होते, but वो 2 हफ्ते पहले नहीं गए थे, वो अब गए थे, ठीक है? So these are the two situations that happened unlikely the way they wish now. Okay, so in type 3, the if clause is past perfect. ओके सो वी सी हम लोगों ने पढ़ा है कि पास्ट परफेक्ट हम कब यूज करते हैं जब हम लोग किसी कॉन्टेक्स्ट की बात कर रहे हैं जो पास्ट से भी पहले किसी पॉइंट पे हुआ है और उसका इफेक्ट आ रहा है किसी पास्ट की पॉइंट में ठीक है सो आई होप you remember what is past perfect. If you do, then it would make some sense here that past perfect, we're talking about some past situation, but that has to be imaginary. Okay, so that is how we would see the if clause is in past perfect. If we had gone earlier, if Matthew had phoned her, if you hadn't made that mistake, if David had been more careful. Okay, so these are the examples for if clause, and the main clause is would have. Okay, so the main clause would carry would have. We remember in type 2 we used only would. In type 1 we used will. Now in type 3 when we're talking about very unlikely situations and imaginary situations in the past, now we would use would have. Okay, because we are using it in relation with past perfect. So we would see would have. If we had gone earlier, we would have had better weather. If Matthew had phoned her, Emma wouldn't have been so annoyed. Okay, I hope it makes sense now. Now this would follow for some other examples as well. Note the verb in the past perfect had been. We do not use would in the if clause. Okay, if clause mein we wouldn't use would. The main clause often has would have, We can also use could have or might have. So we have already discussed कि will या would की जगह पे हम लोग बाकी modal verbs भी comparatively use कर सकते हैं. तो यहाँ पे type 3 में we can use could have or might have instead of would have. But the structure of have would remain there. Instead of would, we can use might or could. Okay, here are some examples for you to follow. You can pause the video and read the examples. If you have any question, you can type in the comments. The use of type 3. Now, where do we use type 3? We use type 3 conditionals to talk about things in the past happening differently from the way they really happened. So हमने जो एग्जांपल देखा कि वो किसी कैंपिंग से वापस आ रहे हैं, फिर वो कह रहे हैं कि हमारी कैंपिंग या हॉलीडेज ये हुआ, लेकिन अगर ये होता तो पास्ट में किसी सिचुएशन को वो इमेजिन कर रहे हैं कि ये डिफरेंटली होती. तो इन सर्टेन कॉन्टेक्स्ट वी वुड यूज टाइप 3. Okay, so for example we would say कि अगर लॉकडाउन ना होता, यूनिवर्सिटी ना खुलती, then that would have been better. या इस तरह से पास्ट वाली किसी सिचुएशन की जो हो चुका है अब उसको तो हम नहीं चेंज कर सकते, that is entirely an imaginary situation. So with that type of conditionals we would use would have. Okay, now it is comparing type 2 and type 3. I hope you already have idea what is the difference between type 2 and type 3. Type 2, we are talking about situations are unlikely in present, and type 3, we're talking about imaginary situations in the past. You can read you don't plan and you didn't plan. So this is present situation and this is past situation. So I hope you have a fair idea now. Okay, you can take a screenshot and read the examples. If you have any comments or questions, you can type. I'll answer you. Now we have certain exercises for type 3 conditionals. I want you to complete these exercises and then you can type your answers in the chat section or comment section, and or we can discuss those in the class. If you have any questions or a particular sentence that you cannot understand, you can type it and I'll try to answer you as soon as I could. Okay, so type 2 and type 3. This is another exercise that you have to complete. Okay, that's it for this lecture. Thank you so much. Allah Hafiz.